Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. The South Carolina Ports Authority, a major economic driver in South Carolina, supporting 187,000 jobs and nearly $53 billion in annual economic activity. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, happy summer. Welcome to Carolina Business Review, this region's most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs. I am Chris William, and we talk about those issues going on, even though you may be on vacation. And we'll do it with Dr. Matt Martin from the Federal Reserve and Rich Fletcher from South Carolina's I-77 Alliance. And joining our dialogue later, well-known Carolina card dealer, Don Flo.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Matt Martin from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Charlotte Branch. Rich Fletcher from the South Carolina I-77 Alliance. And special guest, Don Flo, CEO of Flo Automotive Companies.
Welcome again to our program. Rich, Matt, good to have you guys both here. And thanks for taking time off from your summer vacation. Matt, we'll start with you. So as we watch this economy almost ad nauseum, I mean, every little nth, what's the labor market doing? What do we, gosh, prices are just creeping up, so on and so forth. I can't help but think about this, Matt. So here we are, kids are out of school for the summer, kids are out of college for the summer for the most part. And I kind of stumbled across this statistic that 45% of households with members in them at 35 years old or less have debt, student debt, at least $18,000, $18,500. That in itself doesn't sound like it's a huge debt burden. However, just the sheer number of households with that kind of debt, will this become a bigger problem going forward?
It really depends on sort of the individual outcome. So if you think of someone they're going to college because they want to invest in human capital, they want to improve their labor market outcome, that for most of those, that's going to be a good investment.
That'll be a good trade-off.
Yeah, so if they take on some debt, it's because they're increasing their marketability, their average salary in the workplace. What concerns me is there are quite a few of those who start college, take on some debt, and don't finish. The percentage that doesn't finish, actually, that starts college is fairly high. And so they're not getting the labor market benefit from having a college degree, but they've taken on some of the debt. So I think that's probably where the biggest risk is.
Is that a cumulative number? In other words, can we see that year over year that number gets bigger and bigger? Hence, when people look at student debt or student loans, they say this is a problem that could come to roost.
Yeah, I think you've seen some areas, the for-profit colleges, and from my perspective, some of those are very heavily dependent on students who borrow to go to those institutions. So you see it more over time. Some of this is a leftover from the Great Recession as people went back to school, when you lose jobs, and then coming out of the Great Recession, accessibility to student loans sort of expanded. So I think it could continue to build. But as long as if we could focus on the college completion part, make sure kids show up ready for school, they've got the right mind frame and training to get themselves through and graduate, then I think they'll be okay.
As Matt calls it the Great Recession, Rich, I think, this is kind of crazy to say, but was the I-77 Alliance around during the Great Recession? I mean, you're fairly young, fairly new, right?
Yeah, well, I'm young, yeah, thanks.
Well, so modest. That's
yes, exactly. I appreciate that. So we were formed back in 2013, so it was kind of as we were coming out of the Great Recession. The the I-77 Alliance was formed. It was really just kind of formed to create marketing and branding for that region of along I-77 from Columbia to Charlotte. And as you know, Charlotte's been moving south and Columbia's been moving north along that corridor. And we're really trying to help people in South Carolina particularly understand that Charlotte market is such a dynamic part of our South Carolina economy.
Was that strip of 80 miles or so between Columbia and Charlotte, was that the last real economic frontier that had not been addressed with the two bookends of those two cities?
You know, I don't know if it was the last one, but it's certainly a huge opportunity for us as a region and as the state, with the growth of Charlotte Douglas being the 7th largest airport in the world. You know, and the draw that Charlotte has, we can see a lot of growth coming up that corridor, and that's really what the genesis of the organization was.
So when you hear, and Matt, we'll come back to you in a second, but when you hear Matt talk about the economy, when you talk about the economy, when you have some of your constituents talk about the economy, how do you plan for the next slowdown, Rich? What does that look like? Do you even worry about it because you have grander plans, or what do you bring to bear in this discussion?
Well, really, I mean, what we focus on is really the leads and marketing and branding the region. We're trying to help our local economic developers have more opportunities to sell their communities. So we really look at a big picture, and quite frankly, when the economy does do a little bit of a downturn, that's when we want to spend more money and become more active and find those opportunities, because that's when companies really have to make some strategic decisions about how do we allocate our resources. Is it time to invest in new places or consolidate? And we want to be in the forefront of those conversations.
You know, as Rich talks about the I-77 Alliance, and not to talk about in the third person, Rich, but you know, Matt, I think about this dialogue that's been going on now in our region for a while, and we call it the urban-rural divide, and how the difference between these two sections live. And I can't think of a better place to identify that than, you know, an urban strip that is bookended by two, a rural strip that's bookended by two urban bookends. How does the Fed come down and look at this idea of urban-rural divide? Is it real? Is it concerning? Or is it something that's been in place for a while?
Sure. When you just look at economic outcomes, across the Carolinas, the rural areas are struggling, and those who can sort of, talking about the human capital, if they can go and get some skill, they're going to find employment in the urban areas. So there's that natural migration. Those who can end up finding their way to a metropolitan area. But I think there's something to be said for areas that are adjacent to metropolitan areas. I think one of the key issues is the connectivity. Whether it's direct, you're close enough to a metro area to sort of
physical transportation network?
Well, it could be. You're close enough to participate in the broader metro area, even if you're in, I guess you would call the exurbs, or you'd find connectivity other ways through broadband or something like that kind of virtually reduces the distance. So I think economic development's very tough in some of the more remote places in the Carolinas. I don't think the I-77 corridor's got that same challenge.
I would guess you don't have it.
No, and to jump in there, you know, when you look at Chester and Fairfield counties along the I-77 corridor, two of the smaller counties in South Carolina, Chester's a little under 30,000 people, yet they have a workforce of 1.2 million people. When you look at their labor draw, that includes the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County, or Mecklenburg County and Union and some other counties in the area, and the same for Fairfield, which is like 23,000 people. But they, being part of the Columbia MSA, similarly have a 1.2 million person workforce.
So do you worry about, let's talk about Fairfield and Chester counties. You could say they're rural, except for that band that I-77 runs through.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
I think when you get away from the interstate more than 5 or 6 miles, it certainly is a lot more rural, yeah, definitely.
Is there more of a halo effect now of development going on for those counties?
Well, I think when you look at in particular, you can see the development of GT Tire and Sun Fiber and Roseburg are all really adjacent to the interstate, and that's what the community, the economic development community, is selling, is the access to I-77, the access to the Port of Charleston, as well as Charlotte. You know, one of the reasons GT chose Chester is because Chester was able to sell the vision of Charlotte as this, you know, 2.4 million person community, but you can have the cost advantages of being 35 miles south of that, as well as having a little bit your workforce options are a little bit different as well.
But you know, there's that magic W word, workforce, and Matt, part of this immigration, as you and I were talking about earlier, that part of the growth in talent and the workforce has come from foreign workers. if in the current administration, if we have this debate around immigration, if we have limited H-2B visas, all of this works against growth in the workforce, I would guess. Is this a concern to the Fed?
It's a concern. I think it folds into a broader concern thinking about the labor force of the Carolinas. So we have to import talent no matter where it comes from. For professional services, a lot of that college-educated workforce, we don't produce enough of it in the Carolinas, so folks are always moving here from somewhere else. Whether it's another state or another country, we've got to have that pipeline, or we're not going to have the workforce we need. And it's always interesting to talk to economic developers. You've got to have something to sell. You've got to have a product, whether it's the land or the workforce. And if the workers just aren't there because there aren't enough of them, I think it becomes a problem, and at some point you start to choke off growth.
Is that workforce a challenge for you?
I think workforce is a challenge not just for the I-77 Alliance, it's a challenge for the entire country. I mean, I think to touch on a couple of points that Matt made, workforce is the only issue that companies care about right now that we deal with. That's the only issue. And going back to the student debt, what we see, there's a lot of opportunities for kids or for younger people to choose some career paths with some skill sets and technology around the manufacturing arena where they may be better suited than going to college, but we often have a mindset that we want our kids to go to college.
But if all the companies and all the organizations are worried about talent and developing that talent, then it levels the playing field for everyone. So I know we've been hearing about that for a long time, and I'm not arguing against it. But I am arguing that if everyone is worried about the same thing, then is it really something to worry about as a larger punitive issue to the growth of business?
Well, it's actually a benefit to us as a region and as two states of the Carolinas, because we're net growing. We have a net growing population. When you look at Charlotte, 123 people a day are moving in if you look at the last census numbers. And so that's a huge number versus other parts of the country where you're seeing population declines.
You get the last word on that. Is that a challenge if everybody is facing the same thing?
It is a challenge. It's multidimensional. So we import some talent. I think there are a lot of other pieces in sort of the workforce development cycle that we can do better on, including better skill development over the lifetime for our resident population as well.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you. Coming up next week on our program, he's been on this program before. He'll be back. He is the CEO of Colonial Life. They are based and headquartered in Columbia. Tim Arnold will be our guest. And also coming up, not too far in the future at all during the summer here, the North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper talks about many things, of course, including economic development, policy, and being the chief executive of the Old North State. Roy Cooper will be here as well. When we go to fill up, the price at the pump has lost some of its sting. Not necessarily because we're more financially flush, but because of the advent of things like Uber, ride sharing, increased fuel efficiency, increased domestic oil production, electric cars, etc., etc. Personal transportation is going through a glacial, seismic shift. It seems to be benefiting us, the users, for sure, but what do those who manufacture, sell, and maintain this ocean of cars, trucks, and SUVs think? Well, joining us now is a longtime dealer, automotive distributor, whose company includes 37 dealerships in North Carolina and Virginia. With 1,200 employees, we welcome Don Flo of Flo Automotive. Don, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to be here today.
Don, what an industry you're in. So you hear about autonomous cars, you hear about lower gas, you hear about electric cars. What do you think? What is the seismic shift that you are looking at?
Well, it's a remarkable time, actually, because in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this. And I was just thinking about this last night in a conversation. First, the way people are going to buy cars is going to really change. Secondly, how they actually think about transportation is really changing. And then lastly, what they actually will drive is really going to change, if they're actually driving themselves anymore in the future. All three of those are coming at the same time right now in our business.
So do you have to be, as Wayne Gretzky called it, you have to be where the puck is when it gets there. Do you feel like you've got to be that nimble? Are you that nimble?
Well, I think we have both things going on. Right now, we have to continue to do business in the present environment we're in. So that means we've got to be able to execute the processes the way particularly the retail business has been done. But that's not sufficient for the future. So for instance, digitization is really going to come in our business. My guess is that sometime in less than 3 years, it will take less than 10 minutes to buy a car. Prices will be online. Appraisals will be done basically with artificial intelligence. Right now, customers can access that information through third-party references. And soon the banking system is going to get much more efficient, and the Federal Reserve will let us go through and have approvals done very quickly. And then we would say, so what actually happens at the retail level? What are we doing? How are we creating value at that level? That's going to become a big issue. And the folks who embrace that, I think, are going to find a really different kind of experience with their guests and relationships. So that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. At the same time, groups of us are already experimenting with different kinds of ownership. So for a year and a half now, we've had a business we call Drive Flow. It's a subscription business. You pay one monthly fee, and you can switch cars as frequently as you like.
Every day?
Every day
week?
if you want to. We have 20 different brands you can use inside of it. So you can use a pickup truck on the weekend, a sports car to go to the beach with if you like, an SUV to go to the mountains with, and we use all of our different brands in that. And that requires us to really get in the customer management business and also in the asset management business. So that's just an experiment on our part. Other folks are starting to try that now, but you can imagine that proliferation over time because that fits within what's going to happen with Uber, shared services, public transportation. It's going to be a really important time. And then lastly, we're going to have electrification and we're going to have autonomy come into the city. When autonomous cars comes is up for debate. Directionally, we're going to get there. Full autonomy is a big decision for a lot of folks to make. Insurance companies, road systems, a lot of investments have to be made to get there. So the technology will probably get there before that. I've been in an autonomous car on a racetrack, 125 miles an hour. It's an unusual experience. But they have the technology now in an open setting to go do that now. The question is, can they bring it into actual road systems?
You are a risk taker. Yeah. Matt, question?
I'm actually interested on the financing side that you touched on. So we're in a rising rate environment.
Right.
So that aspect of it, but just the availability of credit for your customers and their sources of financing. What are the trends that you're paying attention to?
So that's
there?
a great question right now. Unlike before the recession where there was, I would say, irrational lending going on, banks are actually quite disciplined and I think match appropriately to the asset level that customers should be buying, not saying go ahead and buy something way beyond your capacities to repay it. I think most folks did find that in the recession that people did make their car payments because that's what kept them in their job along the way. We find that people are actually quite rational. They have a kind of a payment range they've learned to stay within. And the manufacturers have found that, so they have all kinds of incentives to try to keep it within that range, whether it's $400, $500, $600 a month. We do pay attention closely to the subprime world to see if that's growing in comparison to regular prime. And of course, that's related to credit scores and what goes on in that factor, as also matched with down payments. So all of those play a role right now.
Rich?
Tom, you talked a lot about the disruptions facing the industry, but as someone who's in the dealership side, what's the biggest threat to you, over the next couple years?
So I would say one would be our ability to continue to create value for customers in a way that's appropriate for them. So what we did in the past, think about you came to a dealership to find cars, right? That created value for you. We appraised your car, we arranged financing for you. Now imagine if you can do all that outside. So then we have to say, how do we reinvent the value creation model inside of a retail automotive space? And I think that requires us to really extend our thinking much more about how we engage customers. We'll think about customer retention in an all new way. We think it's about personalization and optimization and all the kind of language that fits inside of other industries has got to come into ours. And at the same time, we have the same issue about workforce. So automotive technicians, right now in our company, we're 50 short right now. And we're working with all the tech centers and having intern programs and everything else. So what's interesting is those are really well-paying jobs, full benefits, great future, and a fully trained master tech, he can get another job in 2 minutes. He doesn't like working for me, he can find one somewhere else.
Hence the
so
shortage.
He's very mobile.
Yeah.
So huge opportunities inside of that space for all of us. So we think first getting really good and thinking deeply about what value creation looks like in our world. The pressure we're going to be under is the manufacturers also going through this in their world. Right. And they're trying to look and saying, how do we create value so we're just not pumping out more cars and incentivizing them to sell them?
Yeah, we talk about manufacturers. I want to bring up Ford. Obviously, Ford announced recently, not long ago, that we're going to stop making coupes for the most part.
Right.
The Ford F-150 went through some challenges, but that was a temporary thing. What do you think Ford is going through?
Well, I want to be careful to speculate on that, but
Yeah.
I would suggest if you look at it and you say, the trucks make enormous money for Ford. They have very high demand. They're very popular. If you look at Ford's stock price and the amount of capital it's going to take for the next leap in the car business, everybody's positioning themselves to be as profitable as they can so they can reinvest. Because where we are now to where we want to go, it's going to take enormous reinvestment. Unusual partnerships are taking place all over the industry to spread some of those costs and spread some of that risk along the way. And so I'm sure Ford's looking and saying right now, just like General Motors did when they looked at Opel and they looked at other places, we've got to shed businesses that we're not getting return on assets and equity in. We've got to focus all that in areas where we can expand and build for the future.
Yeah.
So I've lost track of exactly what the statistic is, but the average age of a car on the road went up tremendously
Right.
coming out of the Great Recession.
Right.
I think it continued to go up for a while.
Right. That's right.
Is that still a factor? And I wonder how that is having a bearing on the service side of your industry. You're short technicians,
Right.
but I assume that's an important element of your business.
You're exactly right. So you are right. The average age is 11, 12 years. And think about as cars get more reliable, they're not biodegradable. They're going to stay out there. They're going to keep going and keep going. They're going to stay together. So I would say that I would see the shift probably become in terms of revenue contribution continue to grow in that side, particularly as cars connectivity changes, so that we have full accountability to read cars where they are in their life, connect with customers, and manage that asset all the way through its life to the grave, so to speak, on the car itself. And that has value all inside of that if we can maintain that on the road at appropriate price points for customers. So that will shift, and particularly as we think about the kind of pressure of both the retail side of pressing volume, margins have really shrunk. So most dealers have shifted their business model much more towards the service and parts side of the business.
Right.
We were talking about the manufacturing side and kind of them reimagining themselves, if you will. Do you see them continue to be the car manufacturers that they are, or do you see them being more the technology companies? You know, we talk a lot about in the industry Tesla being a technology company. How do you see that playing out?
Yes, that's a real important question right now for them. If you look at the difference in valuations of manufacturing and technology and services companies, I know where I'd go. So when I look at it, I think, okay, the amount of investment needs to be made. They've got to move towards technology. So for instance, BMW expects in the near future to have more software engineers than they have mechanical manufacturing engineers. So you can see the movement that's going to have to take place in the reinvestment with that. But as Apple learned, when they looked at the manufacturing of car business, they went, whoa, this is a lot more difficult than we thought. So they've got the, you know, how this going to be balanced going forward is going to be really important for everybody.
What do you think the long-term value and long-term life of Tesla is? Clearly, he's a disruptor. I'm talking about Elon Musk. And clearly, he's created a pretty good automobile that's been popular. Can they sustain that type of creative disruption?
Yeah, so I want to first say that I'm an extraordinary admirer of what he's done. His incredible vision. It's not just vision. He just didn't imagine it. He realized it. He actually made it happen. One of the things he also was able to do is to have funding created in the public markets for him in an environment where he's not making any money. And I've seen some of the other manufacturers work in their R&D centers. They have some extraordinary technologies, but they're not in a place to be able to bring out cars that lose money. And so part of this transition we're going to have to go through in our whole economy right now is as many companies bring forth new technologies, often they don't make money to begin, and they have to find markets for themselves. So I would suggest first that if we're going to see large electrification take place and adoption, we're probably going to see the government intervene in the markets to really ensure that to happen. I would say that Tesla's struggle long term will be once the movement happens towards electrification and the capital starts moving into that, they're going to have to really swim fast.
So they're going to have to make good on the value of the stock price versus any profitability that they don't have yet.
Soon they're going to really have to start making profit to be able to continue to have folks believe in the terminal value, that the future value is really going to match up to that. Now, you know, he's don't ever bet against him. He's overcome a lot of odds. One of the things they did was by starting from a clean sheet of paper and designing a car around electrification, it gave them enormous kind of a head start on everybody else.
In about 30 seconds left, you worried about any kind of trade war, because autos are clearly exposed in a trade war?
Yeah, so every single company is exposed to that.
Yeah.
Because everybody's got parts, suppliers, everything else. So that would be disastrous. I'm pretty sure my friends in the Federal Reserve would be very concerned about that as well, because the impact of that are enormous for our country. I'm really hoping that we work our way through that. There'll probably be some give and take in that matter, obviously, in terms of what tariffs look like and what doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, that really needs to get settled.
Okay. Don, thank you for being on the program.
Great to be here.
Always appreciate your point of view. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Rich, good to see you. And Matt, you dodged the question about the Fed having to weigh in on that kind of trade.
Next time.
That and what are interest rates going to do? Until next week, I'm Chris William. Hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Right.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, the South Carolina Ports Authority, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.